There we go. Oh, you're in the office today, huh, Matt?
Yeah, I had to go in today.
Welcome to M2TechCast, a live internet radio show offering the latest news and interviews with the people driving business, technology, and politics in Michigan. Now, your hosts, Matt Roush and Mike Brennan.
Hey, it's Matt Roush.
And Mike Brennan.
I'm actually in my office in Southfield today. Mike, you're at your home office as usual. And we have with us today a couple of people who are, no strangers to this podcast and to our audience here. Our two security experts, Dan Lorman and Richard Steenan, who are going to talk to us about the latest and greatest in what's happening in the world of cybersecurity and how to keep yourself, your information, and your business safe.
Yeah, and I decided to expand it to a half an hour because last week I kept sending all these emails to these guys saying, "Did you write about this? Did you write about?" It was just coming fast and furious, So, and I said, "We're not going to be able to cover this in 13 minutes." So we're going to be on this segment for a half an hour, and then we have Fred scare you for the second half hour. So make sure you have your beer handy. So SolarWinds has made a return. I was amazed. I thought we had that dealt with, but it's back, right?
Oh, yeah. And it'll be with us for a long, long time, because the one thing we haven't started to hear yet is, the repercussions of these various government agencies and commercial entities, basically being breached, right? So that's the next wave that's going to come is, the types of data that was stolen. If it's a commercial entity, they have to disclose that. Government agencies eventually have to disclose it unless they slap a secrecy thing on it. But in the meantime, according to Reuters, they found evidence of Chinese hackers using the SolarWinds exploit.
So they stole all of our military stuff already. What's left, right?
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, SolarWinds, Dan can talk to this, supposedly impacted 18,000 of SolarWinds customers when they downloaded an update that contained a malicious backdoor. And obviously the biggest hacking team in the world, even if it is, Russian SRV, can't manage attacking 18,000 companies and taking advantage of that. So evidently China said, "Hey, we'll eat your scraps.
Deal us in," right?
Yeah.
So
it's crazy. I tell you, Mike, I went back out and this morning just reviewing what the SolarWinds website says. And the way they describe their product is one platform to rule your IT stack. And it's like, so it kind of reminds me of Lord of the Rings, one ring to rule them all, right? I mean, it's interesting for those who aren't following this that much every day. It really covers the full gamut of network management, everything from configuration management, patch management, basically all, they call it one pane of glass, which some people may argue with, but the reality is it impacts, the customers using the Orion platform. It was every area of their business. And so as Richard mentioned, what are the other back doors that are out there? Even if assuming you patched that one vulnerability now, what other, as you said, shoes will drop over the coming days and weeks and months and probably years. So it's the scope of this is just unbelievable. And it's, some people have called it the worst hack, the worst breach in the history of the internet. I mean, I'm not sure if it's that or not, but time will tell, but it's certainly up there.
Yeah. Of course, the history of the internet, as we know it, is only about 25 years, but, but certainly, who would have thought back in 1994 when Mark Andreessen came out with the first browser, as it were, that we'd be where we are today, where the internet is so hooked into everything that we do?
I did.
Did you write about that, Richard?
Yeah, I did. Back then, it was actually 93 when Mark came out with the beta version of Netscape. I reached out to him and asked him if I could use it while I was launching my ISP. And it was down at Coble Hall where I launched the ISP. And I had a connection and I had Netscape. And his response was, "Yeah, sure, have fun." But that was the first time Coble Hall ever had an ISDN internet connection in it, was for that launch.
Wow.
And I remember telling a group of manufacturers reps that in the future, the automotive industry, instead of having all these manufacturers reps selling to buyers at the auto companies, there would just be an online marketplace, and they could just automatically order everything they wanted over the internet. So I created RustNet in order to accomplish that. And obviously we're not there yet, frankly. There's still buyers and sellers. They don't rely on automated systems for that yet. Probably a good thing in light of where we are. But
Well, that was the original aim of what became Covisint, right?
Exactly.
For the auto industry. Yeah.
Exactly. Covisint attempted
Yeah, I
to do
forgot
that.
about them.
Yeah. And then that turned it into a federated identity system, and now it belongs to a company called OpenText, who also bought Webroot, where I used to work.
Yeah, I'd almost forgotten about that. That would have been in the first decade of this century, right? Somewhere on aught 5, aught 4. It seems like when that was,
when the acquisition happened, right?
Right. Yeah. So interesting. Well, also last week we had reports of ransomware attacks. And then this morning I saw one that I sent you guys. I think I sent it to you. What was like the mother of all hacks, the repository for all the stuff that was all hidden away from hack, and now that's been hacked. It's just wow.
Just keeps going.
Go ahead, Richard.
I'm just saying that's why we like to be in this business. It's never gonna get off the front page. That's for sure.
I think the numbers are just astounding, Mike. And you look at a lot of the surveys and the data is coming in from 2020. To talking about 100% increase from 2019. And back in 2019, I call that the year that ransomware hit state and local governments. I mean, that was the big year up to that point where we had all these cities, Philadelphia and Baltimore, and so many people were hacked. And Atlanta and cities in Florida, Texas. It was a really major year, and it wasn't just money. It was also shutting down the ability for cities to, at that time, conduct business. They couldn't close. Well, people couldn't close on houses. There was all kinds of different businesses that really couldn't run because like Baltimore had been hacked and things. So it's just gotten worse and worse and worse. And more recently, as you mentioned, we had one where a company was hit in England. They didn't really patch. They paid the ransom, right. and then they came back 2 weeks later and they did it again because they hadn't. They didn't learn their lesson during those couple weeks, and they had to pay the ransom twice. And so I know we discussed maybe talking about some of the things people need to be doing, but certainly one of them right out of the gate is backing your things up and testing those backups. And I think that's a basic premise that, and people listening to this, your home PCs happens to, well, I got a backup from 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 months ago. I mean, you really need to be doing that regularly, hopefully more than maybe even monthly or more often. So but businesses especially, and they need to be air gapped. They can't be just cloud access backups, because many times those are not those are access when the hackers get in, they get access to your system, they see where you're backing things up, they go in and they encrypt those as well.
Yeah. Well,
it was by air gap, that means for the non-initiated, that means not connected to the internet in any way, shape, or form, that you have a backup that's separate, so that if you do get a ransomware lockout, you can tell them where to stuff it, right?
Yep. That helps, certainly, Matt. I mean, I have a USB drive that you can use, a 50 gig drive. These are not that expensive. On sale at your local, go to Amazon.com, but you can get them at Staples. You can get them anywhere on sale for under $10. And then just, back up the files. You don't have to necessarily back up the entire operating system. You can if you want, but you can reload that, right? But yeah, take all your data files, the important documents you have on your home PC, your work PC, make sure they're backed up and they're separate. So, should, God forbid, my system get encrypted, I've got all that data, all those files, all that data backed up.
And then a rule of life is, if anybody in the room says backup, that means you've got to back up that day, or else your system will crash anyways, within 24 hours.
Yes. Well, getting back to that one in England, so clearly they didn't fix what the problem was. Now, how are these bad guys typically getting in? Is there one universal way or multiple ways? Or are they just really clever or what?
There, in my experience, there are multiple ways, but the one that surprised me the most is somebody, that runs a report on these, and 65% since COVID started are getting in through RDP, remote desktop protocol.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want people to go home and work from home, you just open up RDP in your firewall, people get to their desktop machines, and then they just can open a window looking at their desktop machine and work as if they're in the office. That's extremely dangerous, right? Full of vulnerabilities, reusing passwords to get in, all that stuff. And that's how they're primarily getting in. The other way, of course, is the traditional spear phishing, right? Get you to click on something and that'll open the door. The dangerous ones are the ones that spread as soon as they hit the machine, right? They don't just encrypt the one machine, they encrypt every machine and try and find the backups as well and encrypt those.
Yeah,
Well,
I think
and
a lot
that
of times-
must, I mean, the spear phishing must work, because I can't believe how many attempts I get on my home email accounts.
Yeah,
Where somebody's saying, hey, I'm Comcast. If you don't click on this, we're going to suspend your service. And you look at the from field, and it's not from anything even remotely close to Comcast. So you can tell you can tell it's BS, but I guess it must work, or else I wouldn't try it, right? So
right. Or a FedEx delivery notice.
Yeah.
Well, lately I've been getting a lot of them where I'm being invoiced by companies I've never heard of for products I have no idea what they're talking about.
That's another one too. Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
And you've been chosen for some survey. You've been selected. You will get some deal that's too good to be true. Or some of these may be legitimate surveys, but if they're from somebody you never heard of before, and you're clicking on links, be very careful. I just don't fill out surveys, but so many you'll be entered into this drawing. You will be, and I think the other thing, people out there in the technology community need to be aware that as they're sending out, they may be legitimate surveys, realize that people on the other end are getting these and they don't know if this is, how was I selected for this survey, or how was I, put in the drawing for this free whatever. And they may delete it. A lot of them do, because they're afraid of ransomware. So it cuts both ways there.
Yep. What I don't understand is when people send me links in text messages. People I know, and they say, "Hey, check out this cool whatever." I don't click from my phone on anything. I just not the way I work, because I know my laptop is protected. It's on my network. I've got all my security in place, but not my phone. It's an Android. It's totally vulnerable. I'm not going to click on something. Thanks.
Yeah. Speaking of phones, the state of Michigan last week announced, and I posted in my newsletter today, that they have an app out for a security app for phones. Have you guys had a chance to take a look at that yet?
No, I'm not going to install that.
Actually, I have not either. So I'm
well, a lot of other people might. I was just gonna, I was asking if you had a chance to take a look at it, what you thought of it, but not, huh?
No.
Not yet. I'll take a look at it though, Mike. Maybe next time we can talk about it.
Yeah.
There are tons of
your old stomping grounds there, Dan.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
See what you guys
a lot
did.
of good people. It's been a hard year for state governments around the country. And I think the numbers of fraud, the fraud, unemployment fraud, it's mind-boggling. And we're talking $39 billion. CNBC reported $39 billion in unemployment fraud in 2020, and the pandemic's not over, and you got new stimulus coming. So I'm sure there'll be more unemployment fraud in 2021. So it's crazy the amount of challenges that state governments are facing now, and it's kind of scary.
Yeah, it's sad.
Well, we have a new president now. The last time we talked, we didn't. Do you think that the Biden administration is going to be a lot more aggressive in this area on cybercrime and hacking and dealing with these bad folks out there, nation states, whatnot?
I think, even the Trump Department of Justice came down on some hackers, but they tended to completely avoid, penalizing and sequestering and indicting Russians. So they did do that. And here you've got Biden, taking a harder stance with Russia, so there'll be some pushback. He supposedly mentioned solar winds to Putin when he had his call with him, and certainly his newly appointed Secretary of State has had a conversation with his counterpart, the foreign minister, about solar winds. So I think there'll be some definite pushback at that level, and it could be, ousting a bunch of people from embassies, closing a few consulates, things like that.
Yeah, I would just add that, Chris DeRusha, we've talked about him before, Mike. He was our CISO here in the state of Michigan. I know Chris very well. I think he's a great choice. I think they are going to take it very seriously. You're going to hear a lot more, obviously, after SolarWinds and some of the, issues we had with the elections, more focus, more funding, more resources. There's really, I'd love to hear Richard's view on this, but there's really different opinions about how effective they'll be able to be. Will it fundamentally change the landscape? And part of that goes back to, what Richard wrote about a few years back with Stuxnet, and is kind of the horse out of the barn already, if you will, that all these nations all over the world are now getting into the offensive game. There's a lot of talk about, hacking back, different terms for that, active defense, all kinds of different terminology around going after, the people who are, the criminals who are actually involved in ransomware that we just started talking about a few minutes ago. But, I certainly think you're going to see a lot more focus, a lot more resource, more elevation of this with the Biden administration. But I also think it's a very, very hard environment. I think Chris has got a very difficult job. So, are they going to be not just perfect, but are they going to be able to withstand the amount of hacking and attacks that we're going to be seeing in the next 4 years? Time will tell. I mean, I'd love to say I'm an optimist and they're going to be successful, but I do think it's going to be a really difficult challenge, and it's not going to get easier. It's getting harder. I mean, I'd love to hear Richard's thoughts on that. But
yeah, if you think big picture, the countries that are tightly bound to each other, their governments don't tend to hack each other openly. I'm sure they're still spying on each other a little bit, but you wouldn't imagine the UK spy agency doing a SolarWinds against us, right? And even the economic bind we have with China has reduced the amount of hacking that China does against us, right? They still do the espionage because that's kind of, even I've heard Michael Hayden say, good on them. They stole all the data from the Office of Personnel Management. So you kind of look the other way when it's pure espionage. When it's a commercial attack like SolarWinds, that's a different thing. So the big picture is to get all countries working together in such a way that there aren't any rogue countries. And I'm thinking of Iran and North Korea, obviously, and then Russia is essentially cut off from the entire world, right? There's not a single thing that Russia has that the United States needs today, right? Europe needs their gas, but that's just about it. So they can act, in their own interests as much as they like. They're working to cut off their internet to further segregate themselves from the rest of the world. And then they can willy-nilly there's no legal repercussions for attacking anybody. And we've got to work long term to address that, right? So it's one world working together, recognizing their interests, because that's the ultimate defense against somebody doing something bad to you, is that you can cut off all the business relationships you had with them. Anybody who's been in business has learned that contracts are absolutely no good if there isn't a continuing relationship at stake in order to keep enforcing it, right? Because then otherwise the guy with the most money just breaches the contract and says, go ahead, sue me. So it's just kind of my realistic view of how the world works, is we've got to address the bigger issues at the same time.
Well, certainly both of you guys probably have great information that it's not public on what the offensive capabilities are for the United States. Do you think those will be beefed up without obviously going into any kind of details, beefed up by the Biden administration so that I got to believe the United States has incredible capabilities in this area, right?
Yeah, all you got to do is look at the budget for the NSA, $10 billion a year. The CIA has a much bigger budget, but it's a black money, so they don't have to tell us how much the budget is. But the CIA doesn't have very many agents in the field, so they must be engaged in cyber attacks as well. And that's giant. More than $10 billion devoted just to hacking adversaries. That's giant amount of resources available, and some extremely good people at doing it. It's even to the point where I have the nagging feeling that the NSA probably knew and saw the SolarWinds attack while it was happening, but decided that they didn't want to burn their sources, right, to reveal to the Russians that they could see what they're doing, because they didn't think the risk was that high. That's totally conjecture, but
yeah,
wouldn't surprise me if it came out that way.
I think I agree with you, Richard. We have resources. I think Biden administration has immense capabilities. I do think the U.S. is I hesitate to say leading the world. One of the leaders in the world. I would say this: New York Times came out with a really interesting article over the weekend talking about one of the biggest challenges that's gotten us into this mess is kind of hubris from the United States. That we're kind of the Alabama, if you will, in football, or we're the team that can't lose. Along comes Clemson, or along comes So the problem is that, while we may be the Alabama, we may be the best, there are a lot of other teams that are vying for that. And there are a lot of other, on any given Saturday, as we say in college, but in NFL, certainly, in the Super Bowl yesterday, nobody thought Tampa Bay would win that game. So, I mean, you got, my point is that this really good article in the New York Times talked about that. And, there's a lot of the surface, the number of countries, the number of players, the actors, they're getting better, and the numbers are just growing dramatically. So, I do think we're the best. I agree with Richard. I think, but we got to be careful, humble and hungry, because I'll tell you, a lot of people that are really going after this, a lot of nation states and a lot of criminal actors, and the numbers are growing all the time.
That was sort of the premise of the book that Richard and I did now 10 years ago, Richard, Cyber Stiletto, where the very best people were working for the very worst people, because that's where all the money was, right? And still is, right?
Yeah. We even have seen a couple cases where, consulting companies or security companies, I'm thinking of Dark Matter in particular, which is UAE based, hired former NSA cyber people in order to set up their espionage facilities for Saudi Arabia and various other countries. So the longer we go, the more people there are who are retired from the intelligence agencies who can sell their services for, I've heard a lot of money.
A lot of money. Yeah. Is more of this motivated by criminal enterprise just for going for the dough, or is it sort of a balance between conventional espionage, Chinese? If you look at Chinese weapon systems, they all look like United States weapon systems. What's up with that? So I mean, what are you guys seeing out there?
Yeah, take the world of bad actors in 1980 and just translate it forward, and you'll find probably the same distribution of spies, criminals, pedophiles, all the horrible things that we see on the internet just move there and are taking advantage of having a broader spectrum of attack surface.
And I would just add, though, Mike, one of the things that, again, there's been so many articles written about SolarWinds and a lot of really great pieces, some of them opinion pieces, some of it, mixed kind of facts and opinion, where we're going next, different things. But some really good perspectives around that. We really are talking, certainly the financial aspect to this, certainly there's, and there's espionage, but the fear of critical infrastructure, the fear that ransomware, kind of bringing those two together, SolarWinds, but ransomware, that if critical infrastructure is hacked, that we really could see, the grid go down, or, some of these that people have been saying for years and years and years, a cyber 9/11's coming, a cyber Pearl Harbor's coming. And it's kind of like, come on, the sky's falling. It's, basically it's crying wolf. It's never going to happen. We're not going to see anything like that. But, the fear is that bad actors get, enough access, especially with, capabilities, backdoors from SolarWinds, other types of breaches, that it's not just about the money. It could very well be an attack on, things that we rely on in our society, critical infrastructure protection. I still believe that, at some point we're going to see that kind of major hack. I'm not saying the entire internet's going to go down or the entire grid's going to go down, but there are a lot of people smarter than me that are very worried and are predicting that certainly in the next decade, I want to say it's going to be 2021, we're going to see that kind of major incident that could be, really devastating to society. So time will tell. It sounds pretty doom and gloom to say that, but
it's supported by the fact that a lot of those people who I know as well actually have started to up the amount of cash that they keep on hand. So physical bills, right? Or you can go all the way to having silver and gold on hand for depending on what level of breakdown you see coming. But certainly if the pumps stop pumping at the gas station, that's one issue, not so much during COVID. But if the ATMs don't work, how are you going to get your cash to buy your groceries if the credit card systems are down too?
Yeah, it's a mess. We got about 2 minutes left. Actually, one, it doesn't fall into the cybersecurity space, but an overt thing I was reading about last week is they were talking about the Chinese now have an EMT weapon that they can use to bring down the entire power grid. I don't know whether that's just the Pentagon leaking something like that to increase their budget or whether that was legit or not. But I mean, getting back to the idea, what would cripple the United States the most? If you brought down the power grid, everything's connected to power, right? And so I guess that would be most people's biggest concern.
I agree.
Yeah, I think you look at the power outage we experienced part of here in Michigan in 2002, is it?
Yeah,
that long ago?
It was August 2003, Richard.
Okay.
I was actually at the State Command Center for 4 days. I remember it well.
Yeah, so you lived and breathed it.
Yeah, it's funny. It was Colonel Etchu, who became the Michigan State Police Director, was actually managing that emergency because John Ort was down in Mexico at the time. So yeah, it was August 03.
Cool.
Yeah.
Colonel Etchu is Dave Etchu's mom, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's in the security industry.
All right.
Cool.
Well, we got 1 minute left. This is where we do the shameless plug. So you guys can tell folks how they can reach out to you if they want to get more information or work with you. Let's start with Dan. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, thanks. I'm on Twitter @GovCSO, and I write for Government Technology Magazine, Lorman on cybersecurity. I write for CSO Magazine as well. And happy to connect with you on LinkedIn. So reach out, Dan Lorman. Look forward to talking to people.
Okay, Richard.
So if you want to know what I know, buy my book, Security Yearbook 2020.
Very good shameless plug.
Everything I know in there is right in there.
Great.
Yeah, there you have
done.
it. And you can get that on Amazon for how much?
I don't know what Amazon prices it at anymore. You can get it at my website for $18.
$18. What a value. Okay, cool.
All right. Thanks very much, gentlemen. Sorry I cut out for a minute there. Computer went dead. Who knows? It was probably my buddy Vlad or something. But until next time we talk security, we'll talk again with Richard Steenan and Dan Lorman. Thanks for being with us here today. We'll be back in just a minute with another segment of the M2TechCast. Right now it's Matt Roush.
And Mike Brennan.
And you're watching MITechNews.tv.
Thanks,
What
guys.
do you get at Lawrence Technological University?
Hey, Mike, I didn't
Everything.
tell you, I
Great
have a
labs,
meeting
studios,
at
supportive
3
professors, plus a
o'clock,
full
so I
campus
can't-
life, NAIA athletics, and
That's
all
all
the
right.
software
I'll
you need to
work with
succeed.
Fred.
Be smart, be more. At LTU, possible is everything.
Salaries of Lawrence Tech grads are among the highest of any university in America. Plan a campus visit to meet with counselors, faculty, and coaches. Why wait? Find out more at ltu.edu.
30 seconds.
Lawrence Technological University graduates earn a degree and a higher starting salary. In fact, when it comes to earning potential, the Brookings Institution ranks LTU 5th among U.S. colleges and universities. Be enriched. Be more. At LTU, possible is everything.
Salaries of Lawrence Tech grads are among the highest of any university in America. Plan a campus visit to meet with counselors, faculty, and coaches. Why wait? Find out more at ltu.edu.
Well, hey, it's Matt Roush,
And Mike Brennan.
and you're watching the M2TechCast at mytechnews.tv right here at Podcast Detroit, home of fine podcasts, as well as ours. So, but right now we've got with us our very own expert epidemiologist and infectious disease expert, Fred Brown. He of many vaccines and many much experience with infectious diseases. And he's going to tell us the latest about what's up with these vaccines, right, Fred?
Well, if you want to go into that, we sure can. Yes, big news. Of course, AstraZeneca was taken off the South African market this morning because they weren't effective in the B1.351 variant. So that was big news. They decided to take it off rather than to risk the fact of getting 1 million people vaccinated and making them think they were protected, and then finding out they weren't. So that's the risk of that.
But Johnson & Johnson, I think they've got their emergency approval now, haven't they?
They've submitted, and we're waiting for the summation deck coming out from the FDA, and then the review by the FDA EUA committee that's on the vaccine side of things, and that will probably be by middle of next week, I'd imagine.
Okay.
It takes about
So
10
how
days.
how many people do you think in Tampa, Florida, and the area are going to experience a dry cough in about a week and be in some trouble?
Yeah, that may have been a super spreader event. I didn't like a lot of the video I saw of all the guys in the bars without any masks on, and all the collectiveness. They worked pretty hard on trying to keep everyone pretty separated, and having 25,000 fans in a 65,000 stadium, and 7,500 of them were healthcare workers who had been vaccinated. But I looked at the stands and I couldn't tell what their separation policy was when I looked in. They were a lot of people who were really tightly bundled together, which worried me.
Well, it supposedly looked more full than it did, because a lot of what I thought was people in the stands was actually cardboard cutouts.
Yeah, exactly. It was only.
I mean, it
As
looked
far as I
packed,
know, they
it's-
can't get infected, but who knows?
Oh, well, how's everything been going to you guys? You are looking very formal today. I'm very impressed.
Well, I had to go into the office to finish up a report today. It's easier for me to do that in the office, so that's why.
Well, hey, I put together some stuff that might answer some of the questions, but if there are more, then let's go into them.
Go ahead, run with the
let's
ball
go.
there.
Let's go do that, and here we go.
Screen here so I can see.
So last time we left off, we kind of talked about the fact that they were, well, let me show you what Michigan looks like, I guess, first of all.
Yep.
And let's go to slideshow here. And here we are. So the 8th. You can see what's happened is we've gone through a big, massive peak that was that basically was, this is new cases, right? So about 4 days after you get exposed, it's about between 2 days and 14 days, but usually about 4 to 5 days after you'll start to get that dry cough. And sure enough, you can see what happened, toward the end of right around Thanksgiving, right here, right? A couple days later, boom, we had a big spike. We were hitting over 10,000 cases a day on several days in the Thanksgiving time period. And then, of course, we ramped back down again, and then had another, we started ramping back up right around January 1st, after the big holiday season, and travel around was done. Kind of January 3rd, 4th, I think was the weekend. And sure enough, 3 or 4 days later, we have a big little spike. And now we're continuing down. And that's really a cause to celebrate. But you can see that despite us going down, we were so high that, you remember that big peak and scare we had? We were one of the worst states in the country in April back here, where we were, because we're the auto industry and we had a lot of travel going back and forth to Asia, where we had the viral outbreaks. Detroit was literally one of the top 3 or 4 cities in the country on a per capita basis in terms of outbreak issues, after New York, and I think California also was in that boat initially. But we were really scared right in here, and we were only at around 1,500, 1,700 cases a day. We are over that right now. So just imagine, here we were kind of panicked in April, and now we're just saying, well, that's sort of standard, it's sort of standard for us now. We're anticipating this level of issue. And the problem is, these new viral variants are coming through, and there are a couple of things that were concerning about the viral variants. We went through some of them the other day, but the first big thing that was reported last night from the London School of Tropical Medicine was, not only are they've kind of 70% more transmissive between 30 and 70%. Well, I'm sorry, around 56% overall transmissive increases were anticipated in the R values, and about 70% overall more infectivity. But here, with this, the London Tropical School said they were also 30 to 40% more deadly. And so that means that, in the past, when we had 1,000 people, if you had 100,000 people getting sick, 1,000 of them will die. Now, it'll probably be 1,300 of them will die. And unfortunately, more of them will get sick because of this high transmit. 70% more will get transmitted because of the infectivity rate. I'll show you what happens when that occurs in a second. So here's what Michigan looks like overall. And you can see that this is on a per capita basis. And so some of these areas up here with very small populations in the UP, a couple of new illnesses really cause you to spike. But the point still is that since we're a peninsula, we're sort of sheltered, and that's sort of nice. But where we have the borders, again, I went too fast. Wisconsin border, we're just on fire. Illinois, Indiana, on fire. And Ohio on fire. And that's because those states actually have a higher risk level than we do. And so those counties on the border, which have the traffic back and forth, are more at risk still. And we showed that in the past, and it's still the case. Safest place to be is sort of the center of the state on a per capita basis, interestingly enough. So I wanted to go back when we talked last time about one of the areas you guys know so much about, and that is social media and technology being a factor in acceptance and the resistance we're having. And interestingly, we started doing some research. There are about 276 anti-vax sites in the United States right now, and they have about 56 million followers. So if these followers are negative about taking a vaccine, and we need to have over 280,000 people vaccinate, and you throw in children and they may also be impacted because a lot of these people who are following the vax also have children. They want to make sure their children are safe, the anti-vax sites. That would indicate that we would be under the level that we need to get to be herd immune, which means that we'll all have to continue to wear masks because we don't have enough people to protect who are vaccinated to protect those who are not. And that's a real shame because that really affects, the way we live our lives and who we see and how much we are, how mobile we are. But if that anti-vax trend continues, and as I said, I think they're advantaged in that media because of the algorithms. The algorithms point people toward very inflammatory and sites. So if you kind of do a search for children's baby food, you're going to be steered and offered this opportunity to look at an anti-vax site. If you go onto Facebook, if you go onto YouTube and so on, they'll put up those sites as something that they know attaches people, attracts them in and keeps them on their sites longer so they can sell more ad revenue. That's just a shame. And I think we're going to lose that fight on the scientific side. And here's what things look like overall. What's interesting, this is what the acceptance rates are around the world. And you can see that the acceptance rates of a vaccine in China are very high, Brazil very high. That's because Brazil has a terrible problem right now, and China, of course, they're at a point where just a little bit of vaccination will cause them to go over into the herd immunity spot, right? They're already at only 4 out of 1,000 people getting killed from this vaccine. We're at about, 4 in 100,000. We're at about 700 in 100,000 getting killed by the vaccine. So China doesn't have very far to go before, with just a couple of vaccinations, they'll be they'll be close to herd immunity. So they know that. UK is under fire, so they want a vaccine. Mexico also, but you can see the United States are sort of in the middle. We're sort of 50-50 about it. What's interesting is we are an outlier on this chart. Do you guys see why? We're the only country to get more positive about a vaccine.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, the red dot's farther to the right than the blue dot.
Yeah, that's just it. So actually, we're on not a bad track. If hopefully we can get more and more of that same trend going, that would be great. And this is October to December. And so hopefully, hopefully we've gone a little bit further now in January, and we're getting more and more people interested in the vaccine, seeing that now more people get vaccinated, there are really no serious adverse events to worry about for the average person, and no deaths except one that we're studying by someone who injected themselves, who was a medical worker who was contraindicated for the vaccine.
Well, what in the heck is wrong with the French? Of course, they all smoke anyway. But still, I don't know.
The French are really negative, and you'd think, the country of Pasteur, for goodness sake, right? They'd be all for it. Right. But for somehow they're off on the wrong track. And I'm actually working with Institut Pasteur to help the French get, kind of a better sense of the fact that this is less bad than they think. Part of it is that they had vaccinations. They kind of pushed vaccinations to the public health system. People are unhappy about being pushed so hard. Especially, I'll have to look more to starting to work with them, but they're worried about it because obviously you only get 40% of people, injected, and boy, you got no herd immunity at all in that where we have an R value that's so high for this virus. So just wanted to show you how we sort of are in the middle of the road. So this isn't, and I can't tell you how much trouble I had in Africa with the village elders and the medicine men and so on, but we're sort of, and so in almost every society you see this, kind of, I'm not sure if I want to take the vaccine or not. Hopefully, as people get more informed, they will want to take it because it is just, from a risk-benefit standpoint, hugely beneficial. And it's going to be increasingly beneficial as we move forward, even with these variants. And the reason for that is these variants, even though it looks like the vaccines are not as protective with the vaccine as with the original wild-type Wuhan vaccine, you can see that this is sort of the results that we have right now. And AstraZeneca finally did separate out. Remember, we showed you the slide a couple of weeks ago, I think, when we got this data originally. And I said AstraZeneca has to separate out the South African variant numbers. And the other thing they have to do is they have to look to see who has already been infected. It turned out that 30% of the people who were in the trial in South Africa had already been infected. And that was actually an exclusion criteria. So they went through the entire dosing with an infected person. What that means is if you're infected and survived, you already have really high antibody levels, right? You already have antibodies against the disease. So all of a sudden, if you're 30% of that 30% of the population you vaccinated, they didn't get 2 doses, they got 3 doses. And the first dose was much more protective than we would have anticipated because they already had sort of the equivalent of an initial shot, right? So they took all that data out and they realized we don't got nothing. We're not seeing much of it. We have to develop another vaccine. And so that was very disturbing because obviously we are using, as we pointed out last time, we are using the same antigen for AstraZeneca with a couple of minor modifications as we are for every other vaccine that we've developed. Every one of them is using basically either what they call a PS2 or the original full spike protein of the Wuhan virus to cause the immunogenic effect of the vaccine. So we're talking about an antigen that doesn't look like it's going to be working against the new variants. And that's a big problem. Despite that, though, we are going to be impacted by the B1.17 virus, and the 1.17 virus is much more infective. So what happens is there are 2 things that cause infection. The first thing that causes infection is how much inoculum you're spreading, right? If it causes a lot of shedding, a lot of viral shedding, and you cough, and you'll shed a lot more of those particles that come out and infect you. That's the first part. That's stage 1. Stage 2 is how much more infective are each particle. And it turns out that the 1.1.7 virus spews out, if you catch it, you spew out a lot more inoculum, and that inoculum is much more infective. So it's 85% higher binding coefficients and 56% more extra spewing out when you cough or breathe. And when you combine those things, the whole thing is significantly more infective than what we're used to protecting ourselves against. And that's why I was saying we have to double up on our masks. So we have to be more distant to people even than we were before, because by February, late February, we think this is going to be the dominant strain of virus in many states. What happens is this virus doubles in its spread every 10 days. So right now in Florida, it is 7%. So if it doubles, you go 14, 28, 40, 56, and then you're already in 3 weeks. It's going to be probably well over 90% of the total virus that we're fighting in this case. In California, we're starting off at 5%. So it's 5, 10, 20, 40, 60. And so you got about 5 weeks away from that. In most of the United States, we're probably about 1 to 2%. So we've got a little bit of time, but in our major cities, if we keep traveling around and keep not being unprotective, we're going to have, it's going to spread really quickly. So that's what we're worried about, the B117 virus. The South African variant is here in much lower levels. The Brazilian variant also is here much lower levels, and those are actually much more dangerous even than the UK variant, because they actually escape our vaccines. The B117 virus does not escape our vaccines. If you get vaccinated, you will kill it, which is why you want to get vaccinated as soon as you can, because you want to not have a lot of vaccine around, where when the new variants come in, they can mutate with it, reproduce with it, mutate with it, and cause a superbug to occur. So the faster we can get the vaccines out right now will mean the less we're going to have to fight them at the end of March, where we think we're going to have a big scare because of the B117 virus as it becomes very prevalent. So you can see here are all the results, and you can see that basically J&J, what you really want to look at if you're looking at this, now remember J&J is only a one-shot vaccine, and so it doesn't look quite as effective. If they're doing studies on a two-shot vaccine, which will be hopefully read out, sadly not till late December. I think the government's going to push them to go faster than that. So we'll see whether 2 shots actually this is just the primer and the booster. In this case, J&J is only the primer, and you can see that what's interesting about this is that it does prevent severe COVID by 85%, and that's really what we want. We want to have something that if you get the sniffles, you're not going to be so worried about it, but if you get down with something that's severe, it'll kill you. The issue with COVID though is that it has so many long haul effects, and we'll talk about that in a second. It's not just you got a little pneumonia and and then you're done after you've resolved the initial COVID disease. The issue is that it causes so much damage. It's actually a microvascular disease more than it is a respiratory disease, and that causes permanent damage to a lot of different organ systems, and we'll take a look at that in a second. So does this?
All right, Jeff, with that, I have to back out. I have to head to another meeting, but Fred, we'll talk to you next week.
That's all right. I'll still stay with you, Fred.
How much time do we have still?
Oh, you got lots of time. Matt has to leave.
Matt, it's good to see you. We'll talk next week. I'll catch you up with everything. Don't worry.
All right.
And
Right, take care.
So does this answer the basic questions about what's working, what isn't working? So
yes, very much so. So thank you for that, and I'll talk to you guys next week.
Okay, sounds like a plan. Thanks, Matt. So basically, Pfizer and Moderna, you're protected with against the British virus. You probably are not protected against the South African or the Brazilian virus. They haven't published their results, but they're all developing new vaccines. And when a commercial person, when a business does that, and they have a patent with the original ones, they've got lots of investment in the original ones, and they're already making new vaccines, you can bet they've gotten some bad results. I don't want to speak too much out of turn, because I do know some of this data, and my guess is that they don't protect very effectively. And you can see the big one was Novavax, where they actually reported South Africa results. Overall, 89% effective. Overall in South Africa, 49% effective. We have what we call a cushion, which means that you've got some flexibility in how much room you have, and whether you want to build out a new vaccine. When you drop from 90% to 50%, you've escaped the cushion. There's too much of the virus out there that's going to get you to call it protective anymore. And that was a big piece. Interestingly, J&J didn't go down quite as far, but they still haven't released their full data sets, and the way they released them so far, I want to see those, and that's going to go out to the FDA, as I said, early next week, I believe, as a full data set. We'll see that, and then we'll be able to talk about it in much more detail next week, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure.
That's where we are right now. And here's why the variants are so worrisome, right? We talked about the fact that the B117 virus is about 70 up to 70% more transmissible, and has about a 30 to 40% higher fatality rate. So here's the difference. If you've got a high transmissibility piece without a significant, so suppose you have 50% higher transmission, right? Versus 50% higher fatality. Which one is worse? And the answer you can see here is that it's much worse to have a very, very transmissible virus. It's much more deadly ultimately than having a high fatality virus, all else being equal. So if you have a choice between a mutation, you probably want to take the more deadly one, not the more transmissible.
Oh, okay. Good to know. Yes.
And the reason is you can see that if you have a highly 50% more transmissible, you're going to get about 1,000 extra deaths. Whereas if you have just something that kills you twice as much, you only have about 100 extra deaths in the baseline start of 100, right? 2 times more for 150% more. And at any rate, that's the way the math works out. And so so the idea here is you want to work really fast. If you've got a chance right now to kill off the virus way down at time, this is a 1 month timeline of what the COVID does. So if you have a chance to kill off the B1 virus way back on the left-hand side of the matrix, you're that much further ahead. If you're having to wait, to get the vaccine, get injected, and so on, get a lot of population, and you wait that month, you've got that much more disease to kind of try to control, that much more people in the hospital, that many more people dying. So that's why we're focused so hard on trying to get even though it's not as effective against the later variants, we want to get as much injection done as possible. So that's sort of a sense how that looks for a 10,000 infection scenario. What are the 2 options for COVID?
Well, which brings us back to most people want to get a vaccine. Most people can't get a vaccine because of supplies issues. I'm in favor of the Michigan National Guard marching on the Pfizer facility in Kalamazoo and seizing all those so that we can have them here in Michigan. You think that's too radical, Fred? Or
I think Michigan has a right to some of those. I think it may be slightly radical. Pfizer may have something to say about as well as the rest of the country, but of course, maybe we'll seek some out. I'm joking. We don't do that. Don't do that. Yeah. Because ultimately, the way that we're going to get this best is if everybody in the country gets vaccinated, if everybody in the world gets vaccinated, because you keep having these pockets of guys who aren't vaccinated, and they create new variants that then turns out your vaccine didn't work against, and then there you are back where you started from. And that's the problem we're having.
It seems like the developed world is kind of getting this under control, but what I worry about is the undeveloped world is so many more people and they have such poor health care, parts of Africa, South America, Central America. How do we deal with that?
So we've done the numbers. We think that we will have about 80% of the developed world inoculated. That means OEDC countries inoculated by the end of this year. Other people who want to take the vaccine. There may be a group that don't want to take the vaccine, as we just saw. But if you want to take the vaccine and they're all available, we'll have 80% inoculated by the end of the year. Guess how many of the poor countries? That means the kind of 94 countries that are considered, poor, and guess what percent of the population will be vaccinated there?
Hard to say.
Less than 20%.
That's what I was worried about. Then what? And then the cycle just keeps continuing, right?
That's the problem. It becomes endemic. You have enough virus already in the environment, the prevalence is so high, you just can't get rid of it. And we're there already. We're not going to get rid of this virus in our lifetimes. Unfortunately, we're still fighting against polio, even though we've got a vaccine. We'll be fighting against this. Your grandchildren will be fighting against this.
So it's sort of like you're going to have to get your COVID shot every year, like you get your flu shot every year, and things like that, right?
That would be a bad scenario if the vaccines are that ineffective. But so I was part of the Academy of Science discussion last week. And was nice to be invited to some of it. And they are going to recommend WHO and the CDC that we prepare for that scenario, which means that what we do with the flu is we actually have monitoring sites all over the world. and we look and see what flu variant is prevalent, and then we predict which ones we want to actually get vaccinated against, because the flu starts in birds and moves over to people. You can tell what's going on with the birds, and then say, okay, here's what we're going to do with people. Here's what the variants are that we have to vaccinate against. And then 6 months ahead of schedule, we then create all these vaccines that we hope are going to be the ones that are going to be protective against what we think will be, the flu variants we have to fight. And so that happens every year, and we go through the cycle. And so right now we're thinking about which ones are going to be the most prevalent ones. We're all over the world, especially in China and other places. We're trying to figure that out. We're recommending that we actually do that with COVID as well, that we try to predict what variants we're going to have to fight each year. We try to create a universal coronavirus vaccine, but in the interim, and then boost that every time against the variants that we think are going to be most prevalent to fight. That's the worst possible scenario, but it's better to prepare that now, and invest in that now than it would be to wait and then find out that we need it and not have anything available against the new variants that we could have predicted now in the fall and next winter when we have another surge coming. So that's what we've recommended, and it's expensive to do that, but we think it's worth it to just in case. Better to be safe than sorry. So we're trying to get in front of it, over-responding, as we always try to do in the epidemic because of the exponential growth, and we always work linearly. So that's a little bit about why we're so worried about these variants that cause so much more transmission and are so much more infective than the original one.
Now, have you had a chance to talk to your friends at the WHO who went to China to investigate? I know we talked about this last week.
They are still there. They are still there. There are 10 of them out there, the scientists. They would, so in order for us to really positively finally determine that, they'd have to understand the source, the source variants that China was experimenting on. And it's unlikely that China will give us that. So I think that's going to be kind of a mystery for a while. My feeling, if you can get a sense of this, is that this is, coronaviruses are really getting more powerful over time with the change of the environment that we've got. We've got more people crowding into smaller spaces, and we got closer and closer relations with animals in the wild. That we're going to see a lot more of this. And my sense is that my opinion is this is truly a natural event that we have to get ready for. And we'll see what they find. I'm still waiting to hear back. They're still doing the last week they actually got into the big test facility at the invitation of China, but that doesn't tell you quite enough.
Yeah.
You actually need to understand what they're experimenting with, what the source of those vectors are, and so on, in order to really understand whether that could have possibly occurred through an escape. So we'll see. If they give us that data, then we'll know for sure. But if they don't, which is likely, for defense reasons, they don't want to tell people what they're experimenting on, what they are susceptible to. That's sort of a natural. We'd probably do the same thing if they asked us. So that's sort of where we are. What's interesting about this is that even if our vaccines do reduce our symptoms, it turns out that long haul effects, it doesn't matter if your symptoms are very strong. What matters is what part of your body was infected, and whether or not those parts of the bodies are permanently damaged. And what we're starting to find is that probably we think that it's probably more than 20% and less than 30% of people have long haul effects. And you can see these long haul effects take 7 weeks. Well, in this case, you can see it's almost 25 weeks, and there's still people have them. And they occur in about 3 cycles. So if you're out there and you've had an asymptomatic, or you thought you had COVID, weren't sure, and are feeling a little bit bad for a while, you can see these clusters that are occurring in your body. And basically, the first part of the clusters occur in the gastrointestines. You're going to have loss of appetite, vomiting, diarrhea, and then you'll have the dry cough and rattling breath and so on. But the gastrointestinal effect is something we don't really talk about. And those effects you can see, start very high, and then they start tapering down a little bit. So over the course of time. Cluster 2 are something that pretty much stays even all the way across your infectivity rate. And it starts right up front, burning toes, tachycardia, cardiovascular system is a little bit unhappy. And it usually takes a little bit more time to than the first couple of days and the first onset of symptoms to feel this. It'll take a little bit. It'll take several weeks into a month or so before you really start feeling the bone aches, tightness of chest, the breathing difficulty caused by scarring, the chills, and fatigue. The fatigue is almost always there. So that occurs all the way through. And then finally, at stage 3, you've got a lot of those factors. Plus, you have an elevation of the cardiovascular problems, the dermatologic problems, the hearing loss, tinnitus issues, if you've got those, the joint pain. And so you've got to be watching for these symptoms. And if you have them, even if you don't think you've ever had COVID, go and get it checked out. If you have had COVID and you feel any of these things, go and talk to your physician about these long-term effects. This was the largest study we've done on this so far. It's what they call a meta-analysis. We've combined 14 different countries and the results. So this is happening all over the world. Don't feel like you're out there being an outlier or complaining. It is a real problem for about 20% to 30% of all patients who have this, and go see your doctor about it. And hopefully they can at least start to get you on a course of action that'll help reduce the symptoms. This did not look at some of it looked at the cognitive areas. It did not look at the psychological areas, which are different. But there are an awful lot of people who have an increased amount of depression because they're not able to talk to everyone and be as social as they used to. A lot more anxiety by being cooped up and not knowing what's going on. And sadly, a lot more drug and alcohol abuse. So those are some of the long haul effects. It's not just something, this COVID is something you want to avoid. The vaccine may not protect you from a lot of these other issues. We have a lot of studies to watch. So be sure not to get COVID if you can avoid it at all costs. So how are we doing for time? We're doing good?
Still got about 5 more minutes or so.
Yeah. So one of the things that's happening with these long haul effects, and you'll see out there, is that there's a lot more healthcare that's happening through telehealth. And you can see the increase in telehealth overall. I don't know, Mike, if you participated in telehealth or not. Have you tried it out?
No, I haven't tried it out yet.
Yeah, well, especially around April, people were afraid to go see the doctors. And we were at that point, we were all broadcasting, for goodness sake, be careful if you go see a doctor. Or Matt was talking about trying to see his doctor time because he was worried about his knee and all the protective, the correct protective measures that his doctor had put up so that he wasn't feeling comfortable to visit. But a lot of doctors, people were still scared. Didn't have quite so much knee pain maybe. So they went and they said, no, you've got to help me out. Just let's do this on the phone. And what's interesting is that went up 6,000%. So that's 60 times. Today, about 60% of all healthcare providers offer some form of telemedicine, and 30% of patients actually use them as their preferred interaction with doctors today. So and that's moved from almost not, those numbers are almost 0 and 0, before COVID. So it's a huge change. We think that probably about 30% of all, about a 30-fold increase overall, is going to be what's going to happen as a result of COVID. And especially these long haul effects where have multiple experts have to get together and talk about what's wrong, try to see if they can help you. And so we think that this is going to be a permanent change in the healthcare delivery system. The other big change in the healthcare delivery system is the Internet of Medical Things, the IOMT. And you can see here that there are all sorts of smart textiles that can measure your skin temperature, measure what you've eaten, what you're sweating. There's a lot of smart patches that goes everything from electrocardiograms to diabetic patches to microneedle patches that they're putting in right now, so that you don't have to stick your finger all the time. You can simply read on your cell phone what your reading is, or by a detector what your reading is. I don't know if you've seen the rings that tell whether you've got blood pressure problems or not. Those are coming out. The wristbands that look at electrolytes, metabolites, all the apps that are available now on the Apple smartwatches.
On the Android too. I have an Android phone, and I was looking. Now those smartwatches, they're kind of on the expensive side, but they're like $300, So, but I mean, they test everything. So I'm toying with the idea of getting one, because you can get one now that'll relay the information to your doctor's office.
Right. And so you get that exactly right. So you started to get to a point where it's having impact on your medical, on the medicine that you're going to have, and it gives you a longer term view of, and quite a bit more precise view of exactly what's going on with your body over time. And that can help with medicines, it can help with interventions and so on. One of the things I noticed is that, I'm jumping through. One of the things you'll notice though is that I'll have to show it to you tomorrow. But basically, when you look at all the different companies that are out there, I've got a nice diagram. We'll go into it tomorrow. Of all the different companies and all the different ways they're trying to interact with patients. Everything flows through one of four companies: Apple, Google, Facebook. So the FANG companies are doing extremely well. And the risk is, of course, that they're going to have so much information about us, even on a de-identified basis, that it's going to be difficult for the normal everyday person or everyday competitor to compete with those guys, because they'll have so much more information about your insurance, about this, about that, about you, that it's going to be challenging. But here are some of the things that I have talked with a number of employers, and they want to get more involved in vaccine. And here is sort of a chart that indicates what you can do if you want to start getting more involved. If you're an employer, there are a couple of things you can do. First thing is you have to want to understand how much intervention do they want to get involved with, and that really is determined by what your risk level of your employees are, right? So if you've got a whole bunch of very elderly employees that are high at risk with multiple comorbidities, you probably want to get more involved than if you've got a lot of younger employees that are healthy and don't have any underlying conditions that would put them at risk. And you might want to kind of split off the employees to say you're more at risk, we want to help you more. You're less at risk, so maybe you don't be quite so pushy. You can see that it moves from passive to active. Passive, you really are sharing information, right? So if you're trying to share information, you're going to require, switch the two top ones. Apologies, I'll get the right one to you. You want to require a proof of vaccination, right? But at the very low level, you at least want to inform people, hey, here are the vaccines that are available. They seem to be safe. Here's your recommendation to get vaccinated. Here are some phone numbers you can call, the 211 numbers, for example. And then finally, you might actually say, I'm sorry, but in order to work here or to work, to attend this special football event, I want to see a proof of vaccination, right? That's informational. Then you've got ways of incenting people. And here you see you can offer a stipend to get a vaccination. So if you got a student or if you got an employee, you can say, hey, here's some money, go get yourself vaccinated. Don't worry about it. Or you might want to give them a PTO to vaccination. You might want to give them tickets to an event. Say, hey, great, why don't you go to football? If you want to go to the University of Michigan football games, get vaccinated, and we can give you tickets to the event. Or you can actually start gamifying and start making it competitive of different groups in your community, how much you're vaccinated and so on. That sort of incentivized intervention. And then finally, active means you want to actually get involved with the distribution of vaccines directly. You can say, you go to University of Michigan on this day, and you've got a special time to do that. We'll create on-site vaccination clinics, or you can even start to try to procure your own vaccines. Some companies are big enough, some universities are large enough. Working with a couple right now who actually want to go ahead and talk to J&J about buying their own vaccine, for example, and pushing it through their hospital for their students, for their faculty. That's some of the things you can do at a different levels, depending if you're an employer and you want to get more and more or less involved in the vaccination process.
All right, we're going to have to leave it at that for this week, Fred. Like usual, very informative. If folks want to reach out to you, they can find you at fredbrown.com. And most of the videos, I know you had somebody contact me. I guess you're getting all the videos together in one spot, right?
We are trying to get it together so we can link to you and make it all, much more fluid experience for people who want to see more.
Absolutely. And of course, you've got those fine podcasts you did with the quiet man behind the curtain there, Dave Phelps from IT and the D, right, Dave?
That's right.
Yeah, there's a few of those in that mix. Yeah.
Yeah. Those are the longer versions. Mine are shorter. Dave's ones go as long as 3 hours. So
I think you split them up hard, but yeah, we go into depth in those ones. So that's some of the things that are happening.
All right, sounds great. Excuse me. So anyway, Matt had to step away to do his day job. I don't know why that day job keeps getting in the way of this all the time. What's up with that? Anyway, so he had to step away. So I want to thank you for joining us. Matt would thank you typically, but thanks for being with us today, Fred. We'll get you back next week. What are we going to talk about next week?
Oh, we'll go into more detail about the variations, and I want to talk to you a little bit about what they found with the tropical medicine institutes.
All right, sounds great. Well, this is Mike Brennan, and speaking for Matt Roush, I wanted to say thanks for joining us today. Hope you'll join us next Tuesday for MI Tech TV, where we'll have Fred back along with some other technology-focused companies. Be a great show again. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Hey, Mike, I was talking to the team, the guy who talked